You're listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
Hey, what's happening? Welcome along to a brand new Straight to Video podcast with me, Rob Lane, and I'm super grateful for you listening in. On today's show, I get to welcome back, after what is going to be 4 years this summer, one of the very first guests on the podcast and arguably one of the most hardworking and without doubt nicest and most highly respected rock and rollers on the planet, Mr. Todd Kerns. Many of you will know Todd as longtime bassist for Slash featuring Myles Kennedy and the Conspirators, and Todd has been on board with Slash since he was just going out doing shows as well. Slash! Over 10 years ago, and outside of the day job, he loves to stay busy, and just in the last year, he's released albums with the likes of Minefield, Heroes and Monsters, and most recently, Blackbird Angels with Tracy Guns. We talk all about these records, get into some fun theme park chat, and also dive back into the early 90s to learn about the very first time Todd crossed paths with his future band boss. This Straight to Video podcast is proudly presented to you in association with Affinity Photo. Affinity Photo is an incredible piece of photo editing software, which I've been using for graphic design the past couple of years. I always use it to create the podcast episode artwork you see each week. And what's cool is it's an extremely affordable alternative to other programs on the market. So please, if you get a chance, check them out at affinity.serif.com. Alright, let's get into today's talk. If you want to learn more about Todd and what he's been up to, then head on over to toddkerns.com. Todd will be out on the road for what I would imagine is going to be most of 2024 with Slash, starting next week in Mexico, then head into Australia, Japan, Europe and the UK. But right now, let's dive into my Straight to Video talk with Todd Kerns.
Hello, mate.
How we doing?
Dude, I was just thinking to myself, because I was talking to my wife and I go, I got to do a quick chat. And she goes, with who? I go, my friend Rob from the UK. And I go, yeah, we toured together. And I go, fuck, that was like fucking 18 years ago, bro.
I know.
I go, it was like back in, and it doesn't feel like that long ago. And I started to think about it. I go, fuck, that's fucking bananas, dude. Like when you really actually start thinking about the amount of time.
How fast has that gone?
Well, you look great for being 18 years older. You look the same.
You do as well. It's crazy.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's what I was fishing for.
How you been, mate? It's lovely to see you.
I'm good. I'm in Los Angeles in the Valley, getting ready to, well, I don't have to rehearse for a few hours. So I get up in the morning and slow motion my way through prepping for all that. How you been? Where do you live again?
Like right in between Nottingham and Derby.
That's right. Derby is where Tony Franklin's from. Derby.
That's right, yeah.
I'm such an Anglo nerd that way. You know, as time's gone by, I'm so obsessed with proper football and all that kind of stuff. Every time we go to England, my wife and I are like, you know what? We got to figure out a way to kind of have like satellite hang here, you know?
Yeah, have a few days.
Well, it's like, I honestly could see not relocating entirely, but I would like to, like more so than say France or Italy even, you know, as amazing as those places can be. For some reason, England, I think, has always sort of really spoken to me. Even more so than Ireland or Scotland, the places that my roots kind of come from. It's the rock and roll. It's the whole thing. I just love the UK. It's one of my favorite places in the world.
Which bits do you like? Do you like the bustling cities or do you like the countryside?
It's a bit of both. I grew up in a small town and now I am 100% urban. Even though I still want to have the option to go, let's go get something to eat at 3 a.m. But the reality is I just don't do that. That hasn't happened in 20 years where I've gone like, let's go get some sushi at 3 a.m. It's like, you know, I'm a boring, sober vegetarian. The most boring person my friends know.
Well, you say it's that long since we did that tour in Europe. It's also been 4 years this summer since we did the last podcast chat.
Holy shit. So lots to catch up on. Yeah. Wow. Time flies, man. It wasn't that long ago when I used to go, you know, like 10 years ago in the 90s. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that wasn't 10 years ago. And you're like, God damn. I'm like, I'm not ready for that. Like once in a while when guys would say stuff like, we should play some newer covers like Alice in Chains. They go, that's fucking 30 years ago, dude. Not new at all. Now it's like, you know, when they start talking about Blink 182 or My Chemical Romance, those bands are like 20, 25 years old. You know, it's like, wow, it just blows my mind.
It's 2 years since I got to see you play live in Orlando with Slash. I think, did you and Brent get to go and explore Galaxy's Edge on his birthday the next day?
1,000%. I had gone before. The Star Wars Walt Disney thing is a huge experience. I recommend it for almost anybody. You know, luckily we got connections, and I'm like, well, it's Brent's birthday.
We're going to let him pilot the Millennium Falcon.
1,000%. Yeah, that's what we did. I was in the Chewbacca position and he was Han Solo. You know, I would normally be Han Solo, but because it was his birthday, you know.
Superb.
I mean, to be, you know, 50-year-old children is the most hysterical thing, because that stuff never goes away. The music you grew up on and that sort of influence of films and television, it's sort of always there. And your passion for that stuff is, you know, like we have a friend that runs a very awesome action figures and toy company. And this is the new thing is like, hey, dude, after rehearsal, we're going to go over there and look at all the Star Wars stuff. And I go, absolutely. We are totally doing that. I'm like, this is a bizarre, be exactly the same person you were when you were 9.
Star Wars Galaxy's Edge thing, you're so immersed in it now. Imagine if you saw that when you was a kid, you'd just combust.
Can't imagine. I think it's lost on a 9-year-old today because they don't really have obviously they're invested in it. They're invested. But I think most of that investment was probably by some passionate father that goes, sit down. This is episode 1 and presses play. You know, that almost feels abusive, really.
Did you do the Rise of the Resistance?
Absolutely. That is intense.
How great is that?
That is so great. That room with the stormtroopers is as soon as those doors open, it's breathtaking. You're like, every time it just makes me just kind of, what? Because you're kind of sitting in that thing and you don't really, I don't know how they give the illusion of you're traveling, but you feel you're on a spaceship, you're flying somewhere, you land and it opens and there's all these, it's mind-boggling. And you're like, what? I almost kind of wish that they would steal your phone so that you don't see this on YouTube, because it is, when you see it in person, it's, yeah.
I'm glad I didn't know much about it when I went in.
Me too.
So afterwards, I could watch the YouTube things and figure out how they did it. But every time I've told people before, I'm like, don't look at anything on YouTube, just go in cold.
We went early enough that you had to kind of play this almost pseudo lottery game of trying to get on the damn ride. You'd be at Disneyland and you had to kind of be on your phone trying to get in the queue to kind of get on. And we just got, yes, we got in, got 3 tickets and then said that kind of thing. But one of the things, I've seen it several times and it's still breathtaking. Yeah.
What theme parks did you have growing up?
My favorite was living in a small town and that janky kind of one-armed carny coming to town and running the stuff. And you're like, is any of this safe for children to be on? We would just have these little things come to town and it was a big deal. I'd be like, no way, cotton candy and popcorn and games with the arrows and the, whatever you were doing. And then my parents did take us to Disney World when we were children. We lived way up in northern Canada. I don't know how they pulled that off, but we went down to Orlando. I think I was 11 and my brothers were, they're younger than me.
Was it just Disney World at the time then? No Epcot, nothing?
I don't think so. I think it was just Disney World. Yeah, it was a big deal. So, Space Mountain, Pirates of the Caribbean, It's a Small World, all the OG stuff.
Yeah.
Because this would have been in the 1900s, Rob. Yeah, it was a long fucking time ago. It was a big deal. Like I say, we literally were just these small town kids that never had been anywhere. We'd gone to other Canadian cities to see family and whatnot, but to go all the way to Florida, I guess my parents just said, let's go. And off we went. We were just there a little while ago. My wife and I went down for a KISS convention thing, and Nico McBrain is there and Brian Johnson and all these Englishmen. And I'm like, it's so fascinating to me to see these men who grew up in gray, rainy places who were just they probably landed there and went dude, I'm buying a house right here.
I want some of this.
Sarasota, Florida or something. It's I get it, except for the hurricanes. That's why I live in the desert where it's we don't have earthquakes, we don't have hurricanes, we don't have any of that kind of stuff. So it's kind of other than just being on the surface of the sun for 3 months of the year is, otherwise I could survive. Yeah.
Have you bumped into Monaco since he's been out in Vegas? I know he's been busy with Stephen Pearcy and stuff.
I have, actually. It's funny to not see each other more than we do because we run in the same circles and to be in the same business and in the same town. But, he's traveling a lot. I travel a lot. But we have crossed paths a couple of times. Love that guy. He's an immensely talented individual. I think he's a huge addition to basically anything. But I think whatever Steven's doing, it's, to have Johnny Monaco there is a big deal. It's a huge asset for someone like Steven. Absolutely.
And he's got his line of suitcases as well. Have you seen that?
Incredible. The Chips Enough suitcase. I'm like, dude, I want 5 of those.
Could you imagine?
I can't. Good. Yeah, it's the greatest thing ever. Yeah. I'm like, what? That's so cool. In fact, I just kind of invested in some fancy for me anyway, like some, when you travel as much as we do and you do like a tour and it's like, there's another suitcase in the garbage. And I thought, well, I'm going to invest in some decent ones that'll supposedly last. But then as soon as I'd done that, I saw his Gypsy Enough suitcases and I'm like, God damn it, I would have bought that. But then I would never want to travel with it because it would get ruined. When you travel as much as we do, it's kind of like by the time you come home after a tour, it looks like you've been around the world because you've been around the world, basically.
It's like how long you had that suitcase, like 20 years or something. Like no, about 2 months.
Yeah, exactly. It's just been beat to hell by every, airline worker in the world.
Since we last chatted, I don't know if you've had a day off because you've released so many albums. You did the Minefield record, Heroes and Monsters, most recently Blackbird Angels with Tracy Guns and Adam Hamilton. Were all these done remotely?
Actually, they were. Those were all done during lockdown. Minefield was the first one that I'd ever done remotely. It was just like literally my friends from Ace Frehley's band. And every one of them is the same story. I always tell the same story of where I was just sort of sitting there not doing too much. The two guys, we did a lot of writing too, like this, like you and I are talking now. It's kind of like, okay, and then this and that. Minefield was initially those guys were, hey, do you want to sing a couple songs on this or a song? I can't remember how it started. And I was kind of like, yeah, I wrote lyrics and sang a song called Alone Together. It turned out really great. I'm still really proud of that song. And I was kind of like, well, who's playing bass on this? They go, oh, we're not sure yet. I go, I'll play the bass on this. So it sort of like indirectly was supposed to just be like a little fun project with a bunch of people singing on it. And then it slowly turned into this kind of like pseudo band that never really played a gig. In a lot of ways, it gave me a kick in the ass to kind of write songs and to be creative. And especially during that time where it was so easy to, I don't know about you, but for me, it was like, I'm wired in a certain way that I get up every morning and it's kind of like, yeah, I got to talk to Rob today and we got to go to rehearsal. Is sort of the way I kind of operate. Then COVID happens and you're like, oh, okay. So, and then I still have that kind of got to return this email. And it was like, no, that guy doesn't need your email. There's no deadline. So it took me probably a few weeks, almost a month before I kind of actually settled into like, and then I was like, it's a terrible thing about it. It's such a dark time, but it was kind of glorious in that I was just kind of like, oh, so this is it? Is this what retirement feels like? I go, I think this is all right, actually. Puttering around the garden and reading and lying on the couch watching. Oh, I've been meaning to watch this series, not this episode, this fucking series, Then the thing comes up, do you want to watch another episode? Or are you still watching it? Fuck yeah, I'm watching. Click. That said, that can go too far. And I think that having the Minefield guys really kind of gave me a kick in the ass. And I locked myself in my studio and kind of start scribbling and writing and coming up with parts. And then that turned into this thing that I'm still really proud of. There's a lot of songs on that thing that I think are really strong. Some of those ones that in a weird way, I know, as time will pass, I will go back to that and go, wow, this is fucking great. And I think that that's part of the fun. And the same thing with Heroes and Monsters. I've known Will Hunt for a long time. We're not as close as we are now, but we knew each other. I've been a great fan of his drumming with Evanescence and so many other things. But when he calls and goes, hey, dude, what are you doing? Because me and my friend are, knocking some shit around. And I'm like, send it over, dude. I finished the Minefield record and I was just sitting around again. And then same thing. So we just started bouncing shit back and forth. And that record turned out really strong as well. Again, with no real plan and no real idea other than let's just make some music, because a lot of my friends were like, this is it. The music business is done. We'll never tour again. It seems ludicrous to be thinking that now. But in that moment, there was a weird feeling to have driven down the Las Vegas Strip, which is filled with laughing, happy people right now. But to drive down that strip and just look at this Walking Dead, I Am Legend kind of thing was like, I went down there thinking like, we should drive down there. It'll be so weird to just see it. Like, it'll be so interesting. But it was a bleak, dark, depressing affair. I went down one end and came up the other and went, I'm going home. The fountains are not working. It just was bleak. And I was like, oh, this is so depressing. Because it's a place that people are happy and having fun and celebrating.
Yeah, such a contrast.
It really was. So I think when all that stuff was occurring, it was like healthy to kind of go, okay, let's be creative. And then the Tracy thing was still another chapter of the same book. I mean, Tracy is such an interesting guy because he's got the thing with Michael Sweet. LA Guns is arguably stronger than ever. I think the last few records have been really great, but he's always got these like projects he's been doing. When he came to me, he goes, hey, what do you think about doing like a 70s kind of Zeppelin, Bad Company? I always say Humble Pie because Steve Marriott were, kind of my inspiration. I go, absolutely. And that was sort of the goal, was to make that kind of record. I think there's certainly parts where you go like, oh, okay, sure. And then there's other parts that are like, somebody said to me, this one song really reminds me of LA Guns. I go, well, that's inevitably going to happen. But it was, again, I feel like all three of those records are really strong. Like at the end of my life, to look back on a catalog of music, it's sort of like, can say I feel really good about the way they turned out. It's a bizarre way to make a record because in Slash's world, the last Slash record was 100% recorded live. Well, 99% recorded live, where we're literally in the same room together looking at each other and press record, here we go,
That's going to be cool for you to listen back to that in 20 years' time. You're back in that room again, I bet.
It's really bizarre even now because we're in rehearsals getting ready. And there's times when you're playing one of those songs and it just feels like, because we're literally in the same room that we started putting it together. I'll have these weird moments of just feels like yesterday we were like going like, should we go into this part here or that part 4 times, 8 times, But that's true of almost all the Slash SNKC songs. Yesterday we were jamming and playing, something from Apocalyptic Love. And we said, man, that one came together really fast. Because some of the songs you kind of, how's it? That one we just played it. And I remember saying to Myles, I go, well, we probably should. We've been playing it for 12 years. He goes, Jesus Christ, that was 12 years ago. And I go, yeah, 12 years ago, we made Apocalyptic Love. Like this year, I've been playing with Slash, Myles, Brent for 14 years.
That's crazy.
I mean, a lot has happened. You look back and you go, that feels like about 14 years, but it doesn't feel like 14 years. The fact that the 4 of us, Frank's not here yet, but the 4 of us are just in a room together. And I look around and go, yeah, it's been these same 4 guys for 14 years. It's bizarre.
Did I read that you start off rehearsals with the 3 of you, Slash and Brent? Then I'm guessing Myles has come in and then you're waiting for Frank to come in. Do you sing the songs when it's just the 3 of you?
Generally, no. I sometimes will when there's changes coming. What Slash likes to do, and I really appreciate this about Slash, I'm the kind of guy that's like, we get together, we jam, we play tomorrow night. Sometimes get together at sound check and then play. Do the homework at home. We know the songs, boom, go. But that said, I will admit that nothing is better than a full rehearsal schedule and then going and playing the show. And Slash once said to me, he goes, well, astronauts just don't go to space.
That's good.
And I go, wow, I never, for the life of me, I would never consider going to play a show or a tour, going to fucking space. But what he likes to do, and what I think is most interesting is if you're playing the songs without the guide of a vocal, then you're not relying on the vocalist. You're not relying on anything other than just knowing the song and knowing it muscle memory wise, because he's a big muscle memory guy. Obviously, playing the song on Monday and playing the song on Tuesday can be completely different energies and completely different moments. But I think there's something to be said if you can rely upon yourself. If he decides to come in a little bit late or to whatever and throw you off completely, it's sort of like you kind of have to be ready. And I think that although I always kind of like mockingly say I don't need that kind of rehearsal, it's obviously just makes it stronger. So inevitably, we've always started with the 3 of us only because usually it's a scheduling thing. We get the 3 of us kind of scheduled so we can kind of get in and get the foundational work done. And then whether Frank comes in or Myles comes in later, Myles is usually, he's in 10 fucking projects, like all of us. So his schedule's kind of nuts. And then Frank's with Wolfgang and all that. The fact that we were actually able to get all 5 of us together for this is, to be honest, I was kind of like, well, who's playing guitar? Because I thought for sure Frank is a very underrated, important part of this thing. I think that it's really easy to kind of go, just get another guitar player.
Is he literally the Malcolm Young?
He kind of is. The thing that I like about Frank is that we talk about it all the time. You'll see a Guns N' Roses tribute band or whatever, and you're very aware of what the Izzy Stradlin factor is, which is the Malcolm and Angus, Ace Frehley, Paul Stanley. If you know those bands, you know that they're not just playing the same stuff. They're complementing each other. Keith and Ronnie, probably. That's a whole other thing. And I think that in our thing, we've always, well, I don't really get involved in the guitars too much, but it's always really cool when I'm on stage and I've got Frank is doing this and Slash is doing that. And I go, oh, it's not like just this wall of sound. There's actually some complementary things going on. And I think that Frank, well, first of all, no one knows how good he is because he's always in sort of a more supportive role, even with Wolfgang. But he's a very incredibly talented individual and an incredible guy, period. His energy, take into account that when we brought him into our thing, he was 23 years old, 12 years ago.
Shit.
It was fucked up to think that we just thought he's a great guy. He's a great player. It'd be great to have a guy who doesn't have like a whole lot of, baggage and just kind of go, let's go out and play. Now he's a grown-ass man with a wife and a career. And
is he going to be pulling double duty on some of the shows you've got coming up?
He absolutely is, which I really commend him for, because I've done double duty. It's not as easy as people think it is. Well, not the way I do it. When I throw myself into the Slash gig, it's like I'm a mess. It's like I am crippled by the end of the show just from like the enthusiasm and the adrenaline. So it's going to be interesting because I think that Fitz and I were talking about it yesterday. I think what I admire about Frank is it's not like you look at Wolfgang or like Mammoth Frank and SMKC Frank, and there's like sort of like a different version. You know, it's like, no, he's the same guy. He is himself. You know, like sometimes you're playing in a more heavier thing, so you kind of wear heavier clothes. And then in this, you're kind of like, but no, he's the same guy.
He's comfortable in his own skin.
I appreciate that about him.
Yeah.
In certain gigs that I do, because I do so many different gigs, I kind of almost go like, I almost have different kind of ideas of this should be more of a Barbados kind of jacket, and that should be more of like a sleeveless shirt. I don't know why. I just kind of always have that sort of energy about it. And for whatever reason, with SMKC, it's just the all-encompassing energy of it is I've never phoned in a show. And it's not really based on like some sort of pre-planned idea. The music starts playing and that's just what it does. And that's why, honestly, like now that we're back in rehearsals, it's every day I'm up walking and trying to get to the gym because it's a doozy. So the fact that he's doing double duty, well, he's younger than me, but you might want to do some cardio.
You've got some stuff with the Struts as well down in Australia.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. Yeah, I love those guys.
They're technically a derby band.
Are they really?
Yeah.
There you go. I knew they were English. I wasn't quite sure where they were from. Yeah, there you go. It's a weird thing because I get a little down on myself about like not really digging into modern music on occasion. Like I'll do my best, but I find that I'm at this weird stage where someone will say, here, check this out. And I remember guys being like this when I was younger, where they're kind of, oh, I've heard all this before. I'll never forget the first time I said Appetite for Destruction. I showed it to a friend of mine who was much older than me. And he goes, I heard this all Alice Cooper back in the day. And I go, the fuck are you talking about? And now I'm trying to get away from that side of myself where I listen to something and go, this is great, but I've heard this 100 times. So, but things like the Struts, maybe they're not reinventing a wheel per se, but I think what they're doing is, again, there's an English thing that I've always sort of, very much felt connected to, that I think that when I hear a band like that do it, I go, now this is how it's done, everybody. This is how it's done.
Come here.
Yeah. Everybody gather around the old radio, like an old time radio, like we're going to listen to the Struts now. I think that's the beauty of, because we live in a day and age where every second day someone's telling me how rock and roll is dead. And I go, well, I think you have to be like us and travel around the world and see how it's not dead at all. It's sort of a different thing, but it's, I don't know. That's a much deeper conversation when you get into like pop or country or hip hop, being sort of more a different prevailing type thing. But a lot of that has just to do with the way the record industry works more than just forms of rock and roll or forms of music. It's more just kind of like how that's done. And I keep telling my friends, don't worry, there's some kids in a basement somewhere and they're going to reinvent the entire wheel. And my friends are like, oh, I don't know, dude. I go, trust me. I go, yeah, there was, kids with laptops and there's all that kind of other stuff going on. And that will all continue to be, because it's always really been that way, like whether it comes to AI or pre-recorded music, nothing can really replace the visceral feeling of some kids in a sweaty basement club somewhere just playing together, like whether it's three kids. Like I keep going back to Nirvana because I think it was the last time I really saw a revolution when something just Monday it was this, Tuesday it's this, it's like, and you go, holy fuck, man. No one saw it coming, where bands are playing arenas last year and are now completely struggling because there's been a real shift. And a lot of my friends have a lot of negative things to say about that. And I go, if anything, I feel like it was exciting to be, at that age watching it happen, because it felt like, an entire generation of kids had found their thing. And I think that's going to happen time and time again.
Yeah, everything comes around full circle and it just reinvents itself in one way. You was actually in Hollywood in 91 doing some showcases.
Yeah.
That's when people kind of say when the industry changed. For me, looking back, I think that scene had a good couple of years after then. And some of my favourite bands were still putting out some of the best material at that time. But what do you remember about being in Hollywood at that time?
I was just talking about this because, being in LA, I'm always like people talk about it as if, and then Nevermind came out and then there was just like a line drawn in the sand. So I was down there, just before that kind of stuff broke. But I'll tell you that the Sunset Strip was on fire. It was like wild. You could stand out on the Sunset Strip, never go into a club, and you were at the greatest party you've ever been to. And people would be like, now you got to take these flyers and go and hand them out for your show. And I go, what? Okay. And we'd stand there and hand out flyers. And it was like wild. For someone to tell you that in a few years this won't be like this, you would have been like, there's no way. Look at this. There's no way. You could, the entire, however many miles or mile that is, it was just wild. And we were like, it was crazy. Have I ever told you how we met Slash on that trip?
I've heard you mention you met him in the Rainbow, but that's all I know.
Yeah, we would go to the Rainbow, as everybody did every night. Back then, it was like you'd go in there and it was like, from the pages of Metal Edge magazine, you just got to look around and everybody was there, But we were just sitting at the November Rain back booth, me and my bunch of hick kids from small town Canada. And Slash was at the next table, which is technically where he would always hang. I didn't know that at the time. And this is before Use Your Illusion came out. There was no bigger band to us than Guns N' Roses, to anybody, really. Appetite was like the perfect, greatest band of all time. Guys with names like Slash and Izzy and Axl and Duff. Like, who are these fucking guys? You know, like they were just from another planet. And the record was so dangerous and so, you know, they were cursing on the records, which was like one of the first things I'd heard. You know, it was one thing to hear Dee Snider curse on stage, which was like radical enough. But to hear them cursing on the records was like, whoa, this is some, other than like Wasp or something like that, I get, you know.
And the original artwork was dangerous as well.
And it was very dangerous. Yeah. There was a whole dangerous gutter of Hollywood kind of thing about those guys. You know, we were just sitting there in the club and Slash gets, he gets up in the leather and the hair and, hey, who are you guys? And we're like, we're from Canada. Oh, wow. And he sits down and hangs out with us. And it was bizarre because I, of course, mentioned this to Slash in 2010 or whatever. I go, you know, we met back in like, 9 years or I don't know, whatever it was. Geez, I guess it would have been almost 19 years, whatever prior. And he goes, was I nice? I go, you were really nice. He was like Dean Martin drunk, kind of like, hey, like he was like hosting at the fucking Playboy Mansion in the 60s or something.
He must have thought you looked cool, though.
And he was just really nice and just sat down. He had some girls with him and they sat down. They were at our table and we're like, hey, we hung out. Because I remember our lighting tech for years after would say, because he quit smoking directly after, he goes, my last cigarette was lit by Slash. Because you could smoke in the Rainbow back then. And I remember thinking like, that's a pretty cool thing that you just quit smoking after. He goes, well, I was looking to quit anyway. So I thought this is a good time to quit. Slash from Guns N' Roses lit my last cigarette. It was wild times because, it was like Lemmy was there. We literally walked out of the Rainbow one night and Arnold Schwarzenegger was in Terminator gear and they filmed the outro to You Could Be Mine. They came out of the Roxy on the side door, walked past Arnold, that whole scene that happens. It was bizarre, like to have been in the middle of it. And we just immediately went back to Canada and did our thing. And we did just fine. But it was a bizarre experience. I mean, like I say, when I look back on it now, I go, I didn't in any way think that this is a dying scene. If anything, it felt like there was a lot of like, this is the next big band. And you're like, okay. In retrospect now, when I think of Nirvana or Alice in Chains or Soundgarden or any of the groups that came along, yeah, you kind of realize that maybe some of the gas tanks were running a little low on some of that scene. You're kind of like, oh, okay, I get it now. But like I say, at the time, it seemed like this is a thriving and very alive industry.
Absolutely. I think it could have continued for a lot longer because, there was obviously an audience for it. There's people like you and me who are still taking all that stuff in. But I think it's one of the things which killed it, which I've mentioned before to a lot of people. It was not just Nirvana arriving. I think it was the way the industry and MTV reacted to it. I think there was room for a lot of the other stuff, but MTV just said, nope, just shut the door on it straight away. There
is something to be said about like, this is cool and this is not cool. There's a big difference between what a 14-year-old thinks and what a 19-year-old thinks. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, and we all know that because as a Kiss fan at fucking 11 years old or whatever, I knew that guys that were like 4 or 5 years older than me were like, this is ridiculous. If you talk to anybody like a little bit older than us, like they were into whatever they were into, fucking Kansas or something, you know what I mean? I don't have anything negative to say about any of the music that those guys were into, but it'd be one thing to have been into, that. And then this thing comes along and be a grown ass man and look at it and go, come on. But when you're 9 and you're like, are you kidding me? This is the, Star Wars Kiss. It was like, boom. It was like all came together. And most of the guys that I know who are obsessed with Kiss are around my age, within a 5-year span of like one way or the other. Although there are a ton of guys who found Kiss even in the non-makeup years. It was thriving through the metal years as well. And I think that's a perfect example of what happens when a scene like, like the alternative scene started to happen. It sort of rendered, I can't imagine those guys watching the Heaven video by Warrant, all in white leather, and they're just like paying $3 to go watch bands in a sweaty, gross club somewhere. And that's their world. They just would not understand. And looking back on it, our perspective completely shifted. But at the same time, if only people like Janie had the foresight to have just, it's going to suck, but it's going to come around. So that when you look at bands like the original lineup of Poison crushing it, that's great. I think it's wonderful that all these bands are having their sort of renaissance I mean, it's been going on for a long time now. Vegas is the perfect example of driving around. When I first went to Vegas, you'd drive down, you'd be a big billboard of the Four Tops or some old band like that. You're like, who the fuck's in the Four Tops anymore? Are those guys still alive? Now it's like you drive down the street, Foreigner, and you go, who the fuck's in Foreigner anymore? You know, it's the same conversation because it like this weird shift. I've been there long enough that 80s metal was just starting to present itself. I remember being in Vegas and Twisted Sister had just been in Vegas. I go, Twisted Sister was here? I go, wow. I go, that's so cool. And now it's very normal that, you know, Winger is here or, you know, whatever. I'm one of those people who's just like, even though the industry was hard 10 years ago, hard 10 years before that, it's way harder now. It's changing so much all the time. Talking about that shift into the 90s is a similar conversation as shifting into the downloading world. How it's kind of like, I've been around long enough. You're kind of like surfing this wave of, what are we doing now? So I wake up every day grateful that I'm like strapping a guitar on and playing music today. Not everybody can say that. And I think that it's not lost on me. I feel very fortunate that we get to do this. I knew a lot of talented, way more talented than me, who just kind of checked out. I mean, most of them had options. Most of them had educations or dad owned an accounting firm or something. You know, it's like, for me, it was like, I literally remember being dead broke in like freezing cold nowhere, literally making peanut butter sandwiches in a room full of people and just thinking to myself, this is the greatest thing in the world.
Not many people have that mindset.
I don't think they do. And I think that I literally would watch guys it was as if like Logan's Run was happening, where they would hit a certain age and be like, I'm out of here, dude. I'm getting married, or I'm going to get a job. I'm going to go to school. And I'd be like, are you crazy? This is the greatest thing in the world. I was much, much younger than them. I was like, you know, a teenager traveling around, playing in clubs, underage. And to me, it was like, this is it. This is the dream. And I think that although reality has a way of kicking you in the dick, you know, along the way, but like to still be doing it now feels exactly the same way. It's kind of like, wow, isn't this great? You know, everything's in flames around you and you go, isn't this awesome? And because I've always said I have friends who are like, you know, who always go, it's so cool you get to do this. But I know they wouldn't trade places with me. It's not that they couldn't do it. I don't think that they're wired for like, so we don't go bowling on Wednesday night with my friends and then the barbecue on the weekend. And it's just a different thing entirely.
I heard you say a quote recently. I don't know if it's a quote you use all the time. I've only heard you say it once, but I was like, oh, that's really cool. It was something like, you took the paddle out of the water some time ago and just let the river take you wherever it wants to. When did you adapt that? Because I've done things where at the end of the year, it's like, oh, I've had a really busy year and then I've got nothing planned. Then all of a sudden it changes in a heartbeat and things start to happen. Was there a time for you when you had that realization?
I find that all the time where you'll look forward 3 months from now and your calendar's completely empty and you start to get a little bit nervous. And then you'll suddenly find yourself in the middle of that month going like, good Lord, I'm drowning from how busy I am. I remember back in 2000, 2001, I made a record. Age of Electric split up and me and my brother carried on in a new project, Static and Stereo. And I just had this conversation with a friend of mine that I've known for like 30 plus years. And he told me, like, he goes, that's the best record you've ever made. And I remember going like, you know what? At the time, I would never believe you, because the Static and Stereo record was the hardest record to make. That's when I felt like I was just constantly paddling against the current and into the storm. And you're just kind of like, it was really hard to put together. It was really hard to get a lineup together. The writing wasn't hard. Like, I always loved writing music, but it was a time, Age of Electric had been fiercely independent. We very much had each other's back. We knew what we wanted to do. We had all kinds of people coming in and going, you should do this. Get out of here. You should do that. We don't need you. You know, that kind of thing. And almost obnoxiously, like these young Canadian kids who just, we know what we want to do. And someone will come in and we want to shine you up like a boy band or whatever. And we were just very sort of like, no. And, you know, what's weird is when everybody's on the same team until there starts to be a little bit of success. And then all of a sudden people start to go, you're the reason that this is working. It's like the Beatles. When I watch that Beatles stuff, I'm always like, yeah, it's unfortunate that they couldn't just maybe just take a year off. They probably would have been like, you know what? Hey, what are you doing? Even though, you know, that's one of the greatest missed opportunities is with John dying. I very much feel that they would have found one another again. But at that time, it was just the most difficult chapter of making this record. You know, it tore my marriage apart. It was just really hard. You know, you're doing everything you can. And I was just telling these stories the other day of how I had like very successful producers and very successful managers and people like that telling me what a slam dunk we are, pointing at their Porsches and going like, there's the future, Todd. And I'm like, well, this guy knows what he's talking about because he's worked with all these people. So he can't be wrong. And it's not that he was wrong, but I don't think no matter how successful somebody is, they cannot see these storms coming and these changes coming in an industry. So by the time we put that record out, you know, downloading and any number of issues just changed the game entirely. And that's when I remember just kind of going, it almost feels like taking my machete and cutting my own path. Sometimes it's better to just kind of go, here's a nice, easier way. It might take a little longer or whatever, but it just seems like it's a little less path of resistance. And that doesn't mean that you're not fighting or paddling now and again, but sometimes it's just that kind of like, all right, universe, what do you have in mind for me? I made a solo record around 2004, and that was more, I think I'd kind of leaned into the idea that no one really knows what's going on. And I truly believe that. Even the idea of going to Vegas was very much a sort of like, I just had a random friend. I was going, through a breakup, and he goes like, dude, come down because I need you for this and a couple of things that we're working on, a recording project. And I go, all right. I said, I'll go to Vegas for fun. It was like October of 2006, right around Halloween. And I said, I'll stay till Christmas. It'll be a good little break and just check out the scene. And he had a bunch of shit for me to do and recording this, doing that. And I was like, yeah, it sounds like fun. And I went down, and then we got offered a residency in this thing he was doing every Friday night at some gig. And I go, well, if a visa comes through, you know what it's like because you're not American. It's like, I'm not going to be the guy sneaking across borders. I go, if I can do it right, maybe, then sure enough. And I thought, well, I'll do this till it runs out. And I'm still down here. And that was 17 years ago.
Yeah. What would you have done if someone said, that Faster Pussycat album you were listening to in 1987, you're going to be joining that band in a few months?
Well, the bizarre reality of that was that it was such a disjointed and dysfunctional version of it that I knew it was a little odd. But I think the fact that I'd been playing music for so long at that point, and when Muscat approached me about it, I was like, well, I've never been to Europe. Absolutely. Let's go.
I'm in.
Yeah. And I love Faster Pussycat. I always will. I've always loved that band. They were like New York Dolls 2.0. But yeah, that had such a lasting impact, obviously talking to you all these years later, and quite a few faces that, I remember from back then. It was a huge deal. And like I said, that first trip to England was like that terra firma feeling of, oh, I feel like I belong here, or I feel like I've been here before. And most of it's just because whether it's The Who or the Beatles or Oasis or any number of bands that I have been obsessed with, I just kind of feel this familiarity of being there and going like, oh, this is ground zero in a way. Obviously, rock and roll being an American art form, but there's something about the English version of it that, the bouncing back of American music that would have been completely lost. All those mod guys and all that kind of stuff that just found this American music that was essentially lost on white American kids and had to be repackaged and resold back to them is like, that's the whole game. That's the whole game right there. And when you talk to the guys in Kiss, they talk about they wanted to be like a British rock band. They were obsessed with British rock and roll. It's almost as if the repackaging of it in this British bitchin' clothes, form, you're like, who the fuck are these guys? It's like that's when it really kind of, a lot of the kids fell head over heels in love with it.
Todd, I'll wrap it up. I'll give you one last question and throw a curveball at you. I want you to time travel to a Friday night in the late 80s or early 90s. I'm guessing you'll still be in Canada and you head into the video store. What movie soundtrack do you have on your Walkman? And what 3 tapes are you going to rent for the weekend?
Wow. I was a big music video renter. Like they were always generally music oriented. Like seeing The Kids Are All Right. I saw it in a movie theater by myself, the Who movie. That was actually the sort of ground zero moment for me that just changed everything. So I was that guy. So movie soundtrack wise, I remember the heavy metal soundtrack being a big deal. Had Cheap Trick, The Mob Rules, Black Sabbath. When I think about it now, I would go back and be very choosy about what I liked. But initially, when I think about listening to a soundtrack, other than The Kids Are All Right, that was another one that I just burned out. To this day, it's still one of my favorite Who experiences because it's so all over the map of what they did. The movie-wise, though, This Is Spinal Tap. I would have to rent This Is Spinal Tap. I would rent it and then go in and like re-rent it kind of thing. I just kind of watch it over and over again. I'm obsessed with that film. You know what else I would rent? They actually had Kiss Animalize Live Uncensored in 1984. Yeah. And I think I rented it so much that it started to get that kind of like fucked up wavery line. I think that was my fault. I watched that thing so much until one day somebody figured out how to dub them. You know what I mean? So I had my own copy and then I had a dubbed version, which was, the quality is worse. Plus it's already destroyed from me watching it so much. That thing had a lasting impact. I was telling Gene Simmons this. This is me. I'm dropping names now.
Go for it. Drop them all. Drop bombs. I'm here for it.
I was standing there with my guitar on because I was playing with Gene and I have my guitar really low. And Gene's really awesome. He's become like your eccentric uncle now. Like you're never sure what he's going to say. He's going to diss my haircut, isn't he? But he was really, very complimentary because my guitar, I designed my guitar. It's my signature guitar. And he goes, that's really interesting, really cool. And my guitar is really low. And I go, this is Paul Stanley's fault. I go, this is Paul Stanley's fault because as a kid, I looked at Paul Stanley and his guitar was always beneath his belt. You could see his belt. And Bruce Kulick goes, yeah, but his belt was this wide. And I go, I figured that out later on. He used to wear like these really showy type belts. But the low guitar is Paul Stanley's fault. Paul Stanley, Jimmy Page, Johnny Ramone, all those guys that were, that's where a guitar is meant to be held. Nothing pleased me more than the guy who had his guitar up here and he would go like, if you wear your guitar like this, you can play faster. Like I was like, I don't care. I look awesome. And then lastly, I remember renting the shit out of a movie called Trick or Treat.
Fastway.
Exactly. Fastway was the music with the rock star's name was Sammy Kerr.
Yeah.
Sort of pseudo rock and roll horror movie. It was almost like a take on like Phantom of the Paradise or something like that.
Gene Simmons was in that, the DJ.
And Ozzy.
Yeah.
This is an example of how obsessed with rock and roll I was and eventually what became metal. When they would make these live videos, Judas Priest had a live concert video. Everybody, we would just rent them all. And I would just watch this shit on because I just loved rock and roll. I loved heavy metal. I can remember like renting with friends and it'd be like, oh, okay, we can watch Goonies, which is a fun movie. But I would always go for anything music related. There was something about being that age and that was our music by that moment. You know what I mean? So that kind of really spoke to me.
Todd, I'll let you get to rehearsal.
Yeah, I guess I should get ready for work.
Mate, it's been lovely to see you and speak to you.
You as well. Let's connect when I get over there.
That'd be awesome, mate.
Love you, brother. Peace out.
Massive thanks to Todd Kerns for joining me here on the podcast just before he heads out on yet another world tour with Slash. All dates can be found either at toddkerns.com or at slashonline.com, and I look forward to when they visit the UK in March. So what else is happening in the world of straight to video? Well, I've had a real busy start to the year with interviews and already got the next month or so's chats in the bag. Outside of the podcast, tickets are selling super fast for the one night rental movie which was filmed at our 80s video shop at the end of last year. There's the premiere being held at Derby Quad on Saturday the 2nd of March and tickets for that are available at www.80svideoshop.co.uk. Also excited to let you know that there's some new straight-to-video music on the way in the next few weeks, and please keep tuned into all things 80s Video Shop as we have some very, very big and important announcements over the next few weeks. So find us at 80s Video Shop on all social media platforms. So that's all for this episode, but I'll be back next Friday, and until then, always be kind, please rewind and unwind, and I'll speak to you all real soon.